everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today's video is going to be focusing on some recent reads of mine. I've read a number of books in the last couple months that I enjoyed but didn't really have a whole lot to say about them, so I just kind of wanted to share the fact that I've read them and maybe say a little bit about them without filming a whole involved review because it just wouldn't really be worth it. I'll be talking about 6 books that I've read semi-recently, and the first 2 that I want to talk about are actually audiobooks. I have been doing a lot of cleaning lately. I deep cleaned my entire apartment, and I've been helping my parents clean out my childhood house. So when I get sick of listening to music or podcasts, I've been listening to audiobooks. The first audiobook that I finished was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I'm sure many of you know who Trevor Noah is. He's a stand-up comedian, and he is also now the host of The Daily Show. So he's in the news all the time, in the media constantly. I'm sure you've seen him around, even if you don't know who he is. But for those of you that are not aware, he was born in South Africa during apartheid, and he was born to a black mother and a white father. So he was a crime because blacks and whites were not allowed to fraternize in South Africa during apartheid, and it is just a bunch of different stories about his life growing up in South Africa. Funny, sad, thoughtful. What was really nice about listening to the audiobook was that not only was Trevor Noah's voice really pleasant to listen to, but he got to speak in all the different languages that he spoke as a child, and if you're reading, you're not going to get that same experience. And so being able to hear the different languages and just hear the story in his voice was really, really nice. The only complaint I have about it is that it did jump around a lot. So we would be hearing a story from maybe when he was 6, and then it would time jump and he would be 14, and then he would be 8, and then he would be 17. So it was just all over the place, and maybe if I had the physical book in my hands, it would have made a bit more sense. But in the audiobook format, it did get a bit confusing. I did give Born a Crime 4 stars on Goodreads. It's a really excellent read, especially if you listen to it on audiobook, and if you are debating reading it, I encourage you to do so. I learned a lot of really interesting things about apartheid in South Africa, and I also just got a lot of interesting, funny anecdotes from Trevor Noah. The second audiobook that I listened to was Shadow and Bone, which is the first book in the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. This was published in 2012, and the entire trilogy has now come out, and she's written some other books that exist in that universe as well, but this was the first one, and I've heard about this on and off for a long time. Never had a particular inkling to read it, but one of my friends had the audiobook and she let me borrow it. The book is about a girl named Alina who is in the army in this war-torn nation, and there's something called the Shadow Fold, which has disrupted their country for a long, long time. Something bad happens on the Shadow Fold, and Alina discovers she has this power, so she goes to get trained with other Grisha to take this power and maybe put it to good use and help destroy this Shadow Fold. So it has a cool premise, pretty unique. However, it did have a lot of the annoying tropey stuff that YA has. Since this came out in 2012, I feel like it was the height of YA and the YA craze. So once again, we have ourselves a female lead that doesn't have a lot of self-confidence, describes herself as being very plain and unassuming. There is a bit of a love triangle. It is not the classic love triangle, but there is a love triangle, and it's about her discovering this power and how the entire fate of her world rests on her shoulders. Because the concept is cool, there was a lot of little unique elements that I did enjoy, but I felt like a lot of the romance and Alina as a character was just very typical YA. Not so surprisingly, I did give Shadow and Bone 3 stars. It was an alright read, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody. The other 4 books are physical books that I have. The first one is not actually one I read in the last couple of months, but I never actually mentioned it on this channel other than hauling it a while ago, so I wanted to bring it up in this video. I did read Homegoing by Ya Jassi, and I did read it at the beginning of the year. This was sent to me by Penguin UK back when it was first being released in the United Kingdom, so thank you very much for sending this to me, because there was a ton of hype around this book and I was gonna read it anyway, and I have this lovely edition. I read this book and I did really enjoy it. I gave it 4.5 stars, but I felt like everything I had to say about it had already been said by somebody else at that point, because everybody on BookTube was reviewing this book, and I felt like I didn't have anything unique to say. For those of you that have somehow not heard about this book, it is about half-sisters, both of who were born in Africa, but one stays in Africa and the other ends up going on a slave ship to the United States, and it follows their descendants and how different their lives are. Following the two sisters was great. They had the longest chapter of any of the other descendants, and I really felt like I got to know them, and I learned a lot of interesting things, especially about the Gold Coast in Africa. But as time went on, the chapters for the descendants got shorter and shorter, and there was certainly some descendants that I wanted to learn more about. I wish I had gotten more of, and I wasn't a huge fan of how the book ended. It was all right, and I kind of saw it coming, but it wasn't fantastic. It was really good, but it wasn't quite there for me. Another book that I finished semi-recently is Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything. This book took me forever to read. I started it, I believe, in August of 2016, and it took me until May of 2017 to read it. To be fair, this is a ginormous book. It has over 500 pages, and it focuses on a lot of different topics, all surrounding science and the earth. I am not someone who loves science. I find certain topics interesting, so certain parts of this book I sped through, but then there were some other parts that were just so slow, and that's why it took me so long to read, because I would just get stuck in this one section that felt like it dragged forever about some sort of little tiny creature that I was like, I don't care. I really don't care, so I didn't really want to read it. But at the same time, I wanted to move on to the next section, and I wanted to say I've actually conquered this book. I do feel like I learned a lot. I'm sure I will retain almost none of it over time, but this is a book that is jam-packed with knowledge. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It has some really interesting parts, but it also has some very boring parts. I feel like this would appeal to certain groups of people a lot more than others, so approach with caution. The last 2 books that I want to talk about I read quite recently. I went on a trip to Iceland and Scotland with my boyfriend at the end of May, beginning of June, and so I brought a couple books along to read, and I finished 2 during that time, and the first one that I finished was Birdboxed by Josh Malerman. During my last book haul, this was the book that the majority of people picked for me to read. It's a suspense horror novel that follows a woman named Mallory who loses everyone she loves from this thing. Nobody knows what it is, and for some reason when people see it, they go crazy and they kill other people and eventually kill themselves. The horror suspense aspect of this book was fantastic. It's one of those things where you are fearful of the unknown. No one knows exactly what this is because anyone that sees it goes crazy. Because of that, it added this fantastic uneasy feeling, and we meet a really interesting cast of characters as well. There was a particular part in the book where I was just not into how it was written and how it went down, and it was a very important part of the book, and I also was not totally sold on the ending. I liked it, but I didn't feel completely satisfied by it, so I decided to give it 4 stars. It is a really good horror suspense read, and it's not long. It's not a huge amount of commitment, so it is worth reading if you're debating it or if you're somebody that likes horror suspense novels, but it's not the best one I've ever read, and it's certainly not the best one out there in my opinion. And finally, my most recent read and the other book that I completed while on holiday is Welcome to the Goddamn Ice Cube, Chasing Fear and Finding Home in the Great White North by Blair Braverman. This is a memoir. about a young woman who grew up in Southern California but has this calling. She just wants to go to the Arctic, live in the Arctic, experience life there. She spends a year of high school studying in Norway, and then after graduating high school she goes back there to learn to drive sled dogs. She works on a glacier in Alaska driving sled dogs, and she just loves the North. I was expecting this to focus a lot more on her experiences and adventures in both Norway and Alaska. And to be fair, it does focus on that a lot, but it also tackles some really heavy topics, including a lot of fear and negativity that she has towards men due to an experience she had when she was doing her year studying abroad in Norway. It was not mentioned on the back of the book, and I honestly feel, due to the amount of detail that she gets into and the amount of self-reflection that she does, that it could be particularly triggering for some people. I was not expecting the book to focus on that as much and have it come up as often as it did. There were certain parts of this book that I loved, when she was up above the Arctic Circle describing what life was like sledding with these dogs and just feeling so alive and free in those moments. But there was also a lot of other very serious things that she focused on that I wasn't expecting, and so it made me feel uncomfortable at times. And that's not to say it was a bad thing, because books should kind of push your boundaries a bit, but I feel like the description on the book is a bit misleading. For those of you who maybe are interested in picking up this book, just go into it with an air of caution, specifically regarding sexual harassment and talk of sexual assault, because there's a fair amount of stuff about that in here. I decided to give this one 3 stars as well, because there was some really wonderful moments in it, but it also focused on stuff that I really wasn't expecting it to, and it did take away a bit from my reading experience. So those are all of my recent reads that I wanted to share. 5 stars are definitely few and far between right now. I've had some that have been close but not quite there, so hopefully I will pick up another 5-star read soon. If you've read any of the books I just talked about and have something you want to say about it, feel free to do so down in the comments. As always, all of our links are in the doobly-doo. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you later.